about the success of their parents and how one was better than the other. And the first one said, you know, my dad's a doctor. You know, he gets up early and he goes in and he all he needs to do is wash his hands, and he goes and he does a few things with some people that are sleeping, and he gets paid a lot of money. The next one said, that's nothing. My mother is a lawyer. Now, I can tell a lawyer joke because I'm pretty safe today because my favorite lawyer is not with us this morning. That's my fiance, by the way. One started to say, yeah, well, my mother is an attorney, and you know, she's really gifted at talking and gabbing, and she goes into this room every day and talks to this other person who's in a gown, and lo and behold, she gets more money than your dad does by washing his hands. The other kid was just kind of sitting there and thinking, you know what, but my dad's a preacher, and you know, I don't know how much money he makes. I've never seen him wash his hands, and he does talk quite a bit. But I'll tell you this, when it comes to the end of his workday, it takes 4 people to carry his pay out of the building. We don't do that with your offering here. Will you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you. You are our strength. You provide us with comfort. Amen. You know, back in Elijah's day, it was pretty similar, you know, kind of posturing against one another. But in this case, it had to do with a person's gods. See, back in Elijah's day, he was just worshiping the God Yahweh, one God. He was coming out of a monotheistic tradition, and he was living amongst a bunch of people who had a whole cadre, a truckload of gods in their pockets. Some of them were stronger than the other, and it just created this whole host of saying, yeah, my God can beat up your God. It's kind of like those stickers that you see on the bumpers of people's cars. My child is on the honor roll this week. My child got the most attendance. You know, the Rennicks had one on there that said, my kid can beat up your kid. It was that way for Elijah as they were talking about whose God was better than the other. So one day Elijah went up to the folks and said, you know what, let's have a contest then. I'll show you how big my God is. So they had this contest against Yahweh and one of the other particular gods who happened to be popular in the day by the name of Baal. And so Yahweh was pitted against Baal, and they had this huge big bonfire that was soaked with water for Elijah's sake, and it came on fire. You can imagine it kind of upset them because this Yahweh God was someone who was to be seen as very minuscule compared to the god Baal. Queen Jezebel found out about this ordeal. It's kind of like an episode out of, you know, Star Wars, where Darth Vader gets upset about what's happening with the Empire. And so basically Elijah gets out of town like Luke Skywalker, and he goes off into the wilderness because Queen Jezebel was after him and wanted his head. So after a day's journey, Elijah finds himself underneath a tree resting. An angel of God comes upon him and says, wake up, there's some food here for you. Get up and eat. And so Elijah gets up, and sure enough, there's been some food and drink provided for him. He eats, he drinks, and like most of us after we have a good dinner, he lies down again for a nap. Resting underneath that tree, and he hears a voice that says, get up, eat some more. So he eats some more because he had to get his strength up because he had a great distance still yet to travel. And so he travels to an area which is very familiar with people in the Israelite Hebrew tradition, a place called Mount Horeb. We know this place because we remember Charlton Heston coming down out of the mountain with his two big, huge plaques here of the 10 Commandments, because Mount Horeb happens to also be the place called Mount Sinai, the place where Moses received the commandments, the guidance of how people would live and play fair to one another. So Elijah finds himself at Mount Horeb, this special sacred place of where Yahweh resides. And it's here where Elijah, as we heard previously, where he goes and he goes spelunking, or at least he hangs out in a cave for a while to find a place of rest where he can be. It's here that we come up to the scripture of today, in which Elijah hears a voice say to him, "What are you doing here?" What are you doing here? Now that'd make for a great sermon to ask, what are we doing here? So Elijah continues to say, I'll tell you what I'm doing here, because he believes it's Yahweh who's speaking to him. He says, let me tell you what's been going on. I've kept your covenant, O God. I've done the right things. I've stood up for you. I did this contest against Baal, and old Queen Jezebel is coming after my head. I'm afraid for my life, and I don't know what to do. And then the voice speaks again to Elijah, and because he believed it belonged to God, Elijah did what he was asked to do. He came out of the cave and he stood at the mouth of the cave, and then we get to hear of these different natural calamities that continue to happen. There's a strong wind and the mountains shake, the ground rumbles, there's a huge fire, and as Elijah's still trying to look for his God, Yahweh, he sees nothing in the rumbling and in the shaking and in the fire. Finally, after it's all quiet, when it's all calm, when all the big typical signs are there in which he was trying to look for the hand of God in his midst, he hears in a still, small voice. God speaks to him. He hears the voice of God when all the typical signs are past. And so that's our question for today, to really ask of ourselves is, what signs are you looking for in your life that reveals God's presence? How are you looking for God's presence in your daily life? And see, the point of God speaking in this still small voice was to show to Elijah that God works not only in so much by dramatic revelation, that God doesn't have to have a big, huge parade, big drums and big noises, fireworks and pyrotechniques. God is not some sort of 80s big hair rock star. God is also the God in small things. That God does not need to show up in big manifestations and be visible in those ways. But likewise, it doesn't mean that in the stillness of things, that in that divine silence, it doesn't mean that there is some sort of divine inactivity. When it seems like we can't hear or see God, it doesn't mean that God is not there. And I think that was the sign that God was trying to reveal to Elijah. Elijah was looking for a Moses experience. We can read in the book of Zechariah that God's work is not by might nor by power, but by God's Spirit, says the Lord. These overt displays of power are not necessarily needed for the work of God to be revealed in the noise of life. Several years ago, a movie came out. It was quite popular. It's called Bruce Almighty. The story is about a newscaster by the name of Bruce Nolan who's fired from his broadcasting job. And in searching for some sort of meaning in his job, wondering why someone, so professional in the work that he was doing, could he find some sort of significance in his life? Again, to have some sort of purpose. We've wrestled with that in our own lives. He has then this task that is given to him to become God. And in becoming God, then he gets the feel for what God might go through from day to day. But prior to Bruce being assigned the job of God, he begins very much like Zechariah or even Elijah, asking for God to give him a sign, to communicate with him. Oh Lord, blow up something for me. Give me a big burning bush. Crash down a mountain for me. And it seems like we do that from time to time. God, this is happening in my life. You know, this person is sick. Can you just give me a sign? Well, let's see what Bruce Nolan had to contend with and take a few moments as he looks for a bit of direction in his life.
Okay, God. You want me to talk to you?
Come back. Tell me what's going on. What should I do? Give me a signal. I need your guidance, Lord. Please send me a sign. Oh, what's this joker doing now? Okay. All right. I'll try it your way. All right. Lord, I need a miracle. I'm desperate. I need your help, Lord. Please reach into my life. What the? Sorry, don't know you. Wouldn't call you if I did. Oh, God. Oh.
Hello, 5550123.
Wouldn't it be nice if it were that simple? that the signs are obviously before us when we are calling out for a sign, a message, a word from God. I think the signs are. I think the signs are always before us, whether it be in the words that the choir sings or in the message or response of a child or even in the embrace during our greeting time. The signs of God are before us. So today and next week, I want us to just take a moment to sit back and to listen. I want us to listen. I want us to listen in such a way that we're able to acknowledge and see the signs that are before us. And then to even go a little bit further and to listen even deeper next week as what does it mean to follow what is our heart saying? What does it mean to listen to our soul? You see, I think hopefully between connecting the signs before us and listening to our souls, we'll begin to hear a voice that is speaking to us. Through listening, we'll hear a voice that is speaking to us, a voice that'll challenge us to take up in those moments of silence amidst the noise that we hear that God is calling out to us with a message. There were a couple of friends that met up in New York. One friend was from the Midwest, and they were walking through Times Square having a wonderful conversation when the guy from the Midwest, who happened to live on a farm, began to hear something in the distance. And he said, "Can you hear that cricket chirping?" His friend who lived in the big city said, "No, I don't hear any cricket." He said, "No, listen. Can't you hear the cricket chirping?" And they walked a little bit closer and found one of those huge cement planters holding this huge tree. And this friend from the Midwest, started clawing through the soil and through the dirt there, and sure enough, a cricket jumped out of his hand. His friend said, "How could you hear that cricket amongst all this noise?" And his friend said, "Watch this." He reached into his pocket, and he pulled out a handful of change, and he threw it on the ground. And people from all over the place turned around and started to pick up the change that was on the ground. His friend, as he started to pick up what few coins were left, said to him, "I'll tell you what it means. And why you couldn't hear the cricket, but everyone else could hear the coins. It all depends what you're listening for." It all depends what you're listening for. You've heard the saying, listen to your body. You know, what is your body saying to you? And a couple of years ago, I had a brush with this saying, listen to your body. Now, often I'll go visit people in the hospital or in their homes, and maybe they've been sick or they're deciding, oh, maybe I should go see my doctor. I say to them in that very pastoral, counseling way, well, what does your body say to you? I had the same thing turned on me just a couple of years ago, that maybe I should listen to my body. And little did I know that one day I needed to listen to my body. You see, the signs were there in front of me a couple of years ago. I was sweating very easily without doing much energy. There was a shortness in my breath. There was some pain I was experiencing in my upper chest and my lower abdomen. I had difficulty walking or carrying anything. I was needing to pause more often than I needed to. I went to my doctor for my annual physical, and you know what my doctor said? It's probably just some gas. About a month later, I returned to the doctor, and I said, you know, this is a lot of gas I'm having. It's not going away. He said, well, let's have a test. So maybe it's just your gallbladder. Let's go have an ultrasound. Had the ultrasound, and he said, you know what? You need to go see a specialist. Now, I was supposed to see the specialist after Christmas, and I don't know if it's like this here, but for people in my business, Christmas time's a really busy time of the year. It was December 23rd. I finally sucked up my pride, and I said, you know what? I've got to get to the emergency room. So I went to the emergency room. They ran a bunch of tests, and they found out that at the age of 45, I was dealing with something called congestive heart failure. What? At 45? Congestive heart failure? My heart wasn't squeezing the blood in such a way that normally our bodies would. This smart aleck doctor in the ER said, yeah, it's a good thing you got here when you did, because you were about a week away from a massive heart attack. At 45. See, the signs were there right before me. I just wasn't reading them or listening to them. That still small voice was speaking pretty loud and clear. I just wasn't listening. Now, suffice it to say, I had learned to listen to my body and to read the signs, and again, I'm finding my body listening to me again. I see that many of us experience different things in our lives, that lives are not free without challenges, and I have found that one of the biggest things in my life when I worry about something, I like to eat. I like to eat good stuff too. Pizza, ice cream, hamburgers. That's fine once in a while, but if you got something that's stressful or worrying in your life, you might want to find another way to deal with that stress. I've shared with you some of the stressors in my life, and I'm not going to do a posturing type of story with you that mine's bigger than yours. But if anything, we need to listen to what our bodies are telling us, because I'm telling you right now, my clothes are starting to tell me that I need to get back on track. So I confess that to you. We need to listen to our bodies. We need to read the signs that are in front of us. And we need to hear the voices and that voice within our soul that calls us to make a difference, even if it's in our own lives. You see, it can be easy for us to turn a deaf ear to God's message amidst that noise, and if we continue to not listen to those signs, we just might wind up a week later from a heart attack. See, God is both inside and outside, in the mountains and in the thunder, in the dark, in the quiet interior of our souls. To Moses, God spoke through the burning bush. To Elijah, through the roaring of all the noise and even in the still small voice that God gave to him. So we end by asking, when the signs are before you, whether it be a truckload of them or a pothole in the road or just the smile of your loved one, when those signs are before you, will you listen? Will you listen? Will you look for those signs and respond to them? Because again, God forbid we just be a week away from some sort of spiritual or physical attack, because that would be a big loss. May we listen to the signs. Let the people of God sing, Amen, Amen. Amen, amen, amen. I want to invite you to stand.